Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. This is a STS special, Surviving My Biggest Case. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today, another STS special, Surviving My Biggest Case, where we interview law enforcement officers, former retired ones, about some of the biggest cases that they have ever investigated. And today, you're in for a treat with our best guest, Nina Hobson. She is a former British detective who worked covert operations, major crime, and close personal protection. She's investigated murder, rape, kidnap, and global fraud cases. She was also a bodyguard for celebrities and dignitaries around the world. And she's an ambassador for children's rights, driving anti-bullying campaigns and fighting for the protection of those who are vulnerable to harm. She is also a host of the new true crime podcast called Codename Siren, which I was fortunate enough to be asked to be a guest on, and that episode is out. Nina, thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate it. And thanks for coming on. I feel like we're seeing each other every day here. Before we get into your biggest case, how did you get into law enforcement in the UK? How did that ever come about?
Okay, so I'll be brutally honest. I wanted to be a vet. And I was never clever enough to be a vet. I couldn't go to university, no straight A's for me. So my mum and dad were kind of, well, what else are you going to do? And obviously a young girl was like, oh, I'll be an actress. And they're like, hell no, you're not being an actress. You need a proper job. So one day we used to watch Cagney and Lacey all the time as a family. It was just one of those programs. And we were watching Cagney and Lacey. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. And my mum was like, don't be ridiculous. I went, no, I am. I'm going to be the blonde one. I want to be the blonde, pretty one. They were my words. And my mum was like, you can't just join the police because you've watched Cagney and Lacey. And I went, well, I am. And the rest is history.
Wow. That's a great story. Thank you. Look at that. Cagney and Lacey influencing the future generation. So you enter an academy? How does it work in the UK?
Yeah, so very different in the UK to the US. So you go through a 5-day recruitment process and you can be kicked out at any given time. And one of those days is, the fitness, which back then, and sadly it's changed now. Back then that was my tough thing to make sure I passed the fitness because I wasn't, the gym person. That I'm still not. And I had to run 1.5 miles in 12 minutes. And I remember that we had to run around a park and I was terrible, but I seemed to do better than some of the other girls. And I remember going back and running the last bit with them. And I was like, that was one of the things that came out later. You're a team player, you couldn't breathe, but you went back and helped the other girls to finish. And then you had to go through like team building stages and standing in front of everyone, speaking about a subject that they gave you. And then you had to go through a board of senior officers and then a medical. So it was a really intense process at the time when I joined. And, everyone wanted to be a cop. It wasn't just there may be reasons you wanted to be a cop, which was slightly better than watching Cagney and Lacey. But, we all wanted to do it and we wanted to do it and we had a passion for it. And that was what I really prided myself in, was this passion to make a difference. And then once you were through that process, you went to police academy for 6 months. And it was very strict back then. We're talking a long time ago. We marched on the parade square every single day. We bulled our shoes. I don't think people even know what bulling a shoe is anymore.
What is that? Because I don't know, because it's English.
And make your shoes so shiny for inspection, like military.
Yeah.
Again, I actually didn't pull my shoes because I got friends with an ex-Marine and he was way better at it than me. It cost me alcohol, but and then everything had to be immaculate. We were adults, so obviously we were all adults. We were over the age of 18. We had to sleep in separate dormitories We had to be in bed by 11 o'clock. We weren't allowed off the campus. I mean, it was super, super strict at the time. You saluted senior officers when you passed them in the street. Now I don't think there'd be many police officers if that was what they had to go through. And I actually nearly got kicked out of training because it was the World Cup and everyone was allowed to join in the common room to watch the World Cup together. And two boys, boys will be boys, went into the girls' room. They took my camera, and back then it was the clicky camera, and they found it hilarious to take pictures of their genitals because boys are boys. We were in kind of like a holiday camp at some point. Well, I got hauled over the coals for that. It was my camera, so therefore I was deemed guilty. And we weren't allowed at home at the weekends. I mean, it was like punishment.
Wow. Well, and in the UK, did they do firearms training too?
No, because you don't have a gun.
Yeah.
So in the UK, you only become a firearms holder as a specialist unit. And I think it's 1% of police officers in the UK have a gun. Wow. And even the firearms unit is kind of elite. As a police officer, I was never allowed to go in the firearms training wing and still wouldn't be. It's very closed off and very secret and high end. And
So all your years as a police officer, you never had a weapon?
I had a truncheon to start with. But when I started, again, showing my age, I wasn't even allowed to wear trousers or pants. I had to wear a skirt, and which is ridiculous, why we had to wear a skirt. And we had these ridiculous little bows that went round your neck. And then one day somebody tried to strangle one of the girls with their bow. And that's when you see a cravat now, like the checkered cravat. That's when that came in because you could pull that off. It didn't wrap around the neck. So that changed our uniform. But I'd been a police officer for years before I was allowed to wear trousers, and I had to carry a handbag. So I did have handcuffs, which were really, the old school handcuffs, not the tough ones now. And then I had to have a handbag. So the girls' protection was what we called a truncheon, which was about this big because it had to fit in your handbag. And it was more used to swing a handbag and hit someone with that. But for years, that was how I policed. And then obviously as time went on, they allowed us to wear trousers. We got a side-handled baton. And still, even in the UK, you don't get given a taser. That's a specialist.
Wow. That's
a specialist role.
Wow. Yeah. I can't imagine that in America where we've got paramilitary police officers. I mean, there's a synagogue down the street from me that has private security and they carry long arms, which is wild. America's a different beast. So obviously you have a ton of stories, a million stories, I'm sure, including being a bodyguard for some really prominent people. But you wanted to share a specific case. When does this begin and how does it start?
Okay, when you asked me the question about the case, it's a really tough question. And I've gone backwards and forwards because there's been cases that you remember for various different reasons. And I've been torn about talking about two. And the one I'm going to talk about was when I was in child protection. Now, obviously, working in child protection is horrendous and a lot of people can't do it. A lot of police officers actually say, I couldn't do that. I couldn't control myself. But I took pride in the fact that I could do it because I was helping these kids and somebody was listening to them for the first time. And obviously something like sexual abuse is a secret offence. It's behind closed doors. So it's not, there's a ton of witnesses. And so I worked in child protection before I had children myself. And I remember someone saying to me, well, you don't understand this fully because you haven't got kids. And I said, well, actually, of course I do. I'm human and I'm a girl, and that was my mentality. And so I understood, what was going on. So I left and then went back into child protection when I had kids, and it was different. It was really different. It was, when you did something in the day, and we spoke about cases that you'd covered as a journalist, you wanted to go home and just pick your kids up. and make sure that they were okay and try to not think of how horrendous the things you were dealing with were. But this one particular case, it started out, I was a detective, and I wasn't on child protection at the time. I was actually on regional CID, Criminal Investigation Department. And I had a crewmate, and we did everything together. And we were actually on call late that night, so not all the detectives were around. And there was a riot came out. We worked in a really very rough socioeconomic poor area, and there was a riot came out on one of the estates, and so obviously uniform go, everybody goes, and nobody really knew what it was about. We then find out while this is all happening, and now we're called in because one of the men on the estate, and his name is Michael Thompson, and I'll never forget that name. He basically lived on the estate, and what he'd done, he'd befriended all of the girls. He'd got a very young child himself, and so his MO was to befriend the girls on the estate and get them to come and look after his child. And at the time, they were looking after his child, his wife, who was not there, and that's another story in a minute. He would abuse the girls on the estate. And so this had been going on for a long time, and he would be what you would see as a typical, or society would say, he looked like the typical pedophile, and he would be giving the kids sweets and chocolates and ice cream. And I remember it was the Spice Girls that was super big at the time, and he was videoing the girls, even while they were, just dancing. And I say just dancing because to you and I and a normal person, that's all it was. But to him, he was videoing the tops of their legs or up their skirts because that was giving him his sexual gratification. So all hell broke out because one of the girls that had come round to babysit was a little bit older, and he had tried to touch her breast, and it hadn't gone down very well. And she had gone home and told her dad. And so this is what was the result of her saying, Michael Thompson touched me. Obviously, Dad pulled his friends together in the estate, and they actually set fire to his house. Wow. So then we get him out, establish very quickly what's happened. He's arrested. And then obviously...
This is the father now, or this is Michael Thompson?
Michael Thompson is arrested. Yeah.
Okay.
And we interview him, and you've got this young baby. He's a lot older. He was early 60s, but he had a child. I think she was 2.
Wow.
And he had married a lady from the Philippines, and he would go to the Philippines every year. And 7 years previously to this incident happening, he had married a lady from the Philippines. While he was married to her, she wasn't able to come into the UK initially. And then while he was married to her, she actually had several other children during the time that she wasn't in the UK. And eventually he brings her into the UK, and they have a baby together, this young child. What he does with her, he sends her to work pretty much 24/7, so that she is now out of the house. He's the stay-at-home dad, which allows him access to all these kids. It allowed the estate to feel sorry for him because there he is as a dad trying to bring his little girl up on his own, while wife's at work trying to make ends meet. So he had it all very, very well planned. But once we interviewed him, and he was very manipulative, and pedophiles, when you interview them, often are. That's how they exist. That's what they're good at. That's how they get access to the children that they want access to. So he was very manipulative in the interview, but we eventually established that he's part of a pedophile ring, which is actually based out of the Philippines. And we do a search warrant on his house, and so when we arrest him, there's tickets to the Philippines the following day. So he was going on his annual Philippine child abuse trip because that's what it was. And there was a letter.
Was he going there to meet with young children? That's what he was doing, or to bring them back as like sex workers, or just he was just going there?
He was going there to have his fulfillment of young children. And we recovered a letter that basically outlined that and said that whoever his contact was in the Philippines, they had and this is graphic, so I do apologize in advance, but they had a 7-year-old waiting for him as his pet. Now, that's made me go goosebumpy and horrible because I've got an image of him, and it was horrendous. So he was actually charged with 13 offenses, I believe, so 13 different children. So what happens next is we now, and as a previous child protection officer, we were very highly trained in how to interview children. And again, I think the British police training is out of this world. It really, everything is really done very high standard. So we're trained to interview the children. So now we have him locked up. We've calmed down the estate and the parents. And now our job is to obviously get the evidence to get him locked up for as long as possible. So the process starts where we interview the children, and it's done on video. They're taken to what we call the suite, and it's specially designed with obviously cameras. We explain to them what they are, and in the room behind, there's 2 detectives who will watch the interview. You'll have an earpiece. So if I'm the interviewing officer, I have an earpiece. And I start the process, but at any point, one of the detectives wants me to say something or change something or push something, they'll talk in my earpiece. But it's very, very victim-led, as it should be. And they don't have parents in there. If they're obviously they're young, the parents can sit outside. But the point is that sometimes children won't say things in front of their parents or in front of their close friends because obviously embarrassment, protection. And it's very difficult to get children to talk about sex using correct terminology.
Did you have special training in how to conduct these interviews? A lot of it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So all of us had very, very special training with how to interview, obviously, victims, and then how to interview children and how to interview the paedophile. So we all had that training, and you could only interview children if you had that training. So you could.
When you're interviewing a child, what is sort of the predominating thought process in terms of the interview? What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to ask open-ended questions and just allow them to speak, or what's like the main crux of the interview process?
Yes, it is. It's very open-ended, not to put things into their in their words or their brains, and allow them to speak in their terms. But it's very difficult because sometimes somebody may call their private part a flower, but for evidential purposes, you have to establish really what does a flower mean, because a flower to me can mean something. I might assume I know what the child's talking about, but evidentially you have to try and get them to say the correct terminology or work out a way of establishing what's really gone on. And for the young children, we'd get them to draw pictures, and they would become a piece of evidence. We had, there was a lot of controversy about the use of dolls because kids play with dolls all the time. And just because kids put 2 dolls together like that doesn't mean that they've been abused. But the main way of interviewing a child is to very open-ended questions and then to home in on something that they have said. Now, it's very difficult as a detective when you're across the whole case because you know evidentially what you need to prove in order for this to go to court and in order for that person to get locked away. But you have to be very victim-led. A, because you don't want to jeopardize that court case. B, you don't want to re-traumatize the kids, which it is re-trauma because you're asking them to repeat things. And children's reactions are very varied. And some are very open and want to talk. Some are very embarrassed. Some don't even understand the significance of what you're trying to talk to them about. And so it's a really skilled act to do that.
And just back to one thing, when you refer to something as an estate, is that like a housing complex in the UK? It's
Yes.
like a cluster of apartments. Is that it?
It's more like streets of different houses. So how would I describe it over here? You may say it's like a suburb, I suppose, but there's a particular, what they call the estate is like, oh, that's a really nice estate because those 10 streets are really fancy. That's a not so nice estate because those 10 streets are not fancy.
Got it. So this was not one of the nicer estates, I assume, or was it? No. Okay.
It was a really unpleasant estate in the sense of a lot of crime there, a lot of unemployment. So it was.
So you interviewed. How many kids did you end up interviewing?
I think we interviewed around 15 for that case. And that can take a long time. And obviously, you have somebody in custody, so you want to talk to what's happening. You try, and it's best practice with interviewing children. So the best practice is that you only interview them once because that's their first recollection. That's when they say things. But on occasions, we have interviewed children more than once. But when you're dealing with a number of children who are making a complaint against the same person, you try to just get their recollection and not cross-contaminate it with any of the other people that have spoken to you. But I do remember that he was charged with 13 offences, I think he was charged with, of abuse on the children. And then you have the whole court case shenanigans.
And when you interviewed Michael Thompson, was he at all forthcoming, or was he very manipulative the entire time?
Oh, yeah, no, he didn't tell us anything. He had great stories of why he was doing things, why the kids had said things. It was because, even little things like, oh, I wouldn't give them an ice pole, so they've made this allegation. Why he was going to the Philippines. Obviously, he had a Filipino wife, and that he was leaving at home. So he had an answer for everything. And it was the first time, I believe, and it's a long time ago, but I think it was the first time we had come across him. So he wasn't telling us anything. And now we have an international case because we have a Philippine pedophile ring. So
you have him in custody, you do these interviews, and then what happens after that?
So he kept, and obviously the process in the UK is different to here also. So we asked for him to be kept in custody, which you have to go to court for, and you either get bail, you can go out while the police do their investigation, or we can hold you in custody while the police do your investigation, because you're only allowed to be in custody for 24 hours in the UK without being released or charged or said we're continuing with the investigation. So we did go back to court the next day, and he was held in custody as in prison while we continued the investigation. And so now we have to bring in New Scotland Yard paedophile unit because they deal with the international side. And so my crewmate and I were seconded down to New Scotland Yard for a while to work on this case. It was suggested that, and this is a whole different story because you now got to deal with the Philippines, and that's a whole different ball game of corruption and everything else. So it was actually suggested that we went to the Philippines to work with them, but the Philippines would not allow that. So we didn't go. So everything was passed to them about the ring that was there. And this was one of the things that was really frustrating for us as police officers. We knew that bad stuff was going on in the Philippines, but that was not our jurisdiction now. So the Filipinos had to deal with it. And we know for a fact that wasn't going to happen in the same way that it would have been dealt with by the UK police. So our role now was to concentrate on who we had in custody and protection of the children. And also, obviously, our priority now is to get justice for these young kids because, suddenly they've had somebody listen to them. And back to what I said at the start, I did what I did with the Child Protection Unit so that I could let the children know somebody actually was listening to them. So we continued the investigation, lots of interviews. As I say, we did a warrant on his house. But it is a difficult case because it's one word against another. And fortunately, he did have footage of things that he had taken of the girls. And again, normal people would look at it and go, that's just girls dancing. That's just girls sucking a lollipop. But it's obviously there's so much more that was going on with this guy. And obviously he had progressed from filming the girls, and that was giving him his kick, to touching the girls. And so that was our primary role, was to get justice now.
And what was the age range of these girls?
The age, I think, was 6 to 14, I believe. Again.
Yeah, and he's 60-something, early 60s.
Yeah, he was early 60s, yeah. And his baby was 2. And, the girls just went to his house because he was a nice guy, and they looked after the little girl, and she was sweet and cute. And they were so naive to what was going on until, as often happens, his need and his level of gratification increased, which meant he increased his risk. So to now touch a girl who at 14 is more developed than obviously a 10-year-old, that was when he pushed his luck, basically. But that's often how things go. Things escalate as an offender moves up the chain.
By the way, whatever happened to the father that lit this man's house on fire?
No, they didn't charge him. They did arrest him that night. I think they arrested a number of people. They had to because it was getting out of control, but mitigating circumstances. And that's what, I respect the police and the Crown prosecution, because you know what? That's the least he would have got if it had been my child. So, he's lucky that he only set fire to the house.
Well, we had a couple of times, on this show, Jody Plowshay, which is a super famous case in America, 1984. Jody Plowshay, I think, was 8 or 9 years old, and he was being sexually abused by his karate teacher, his martial arts teacher, and he was then abducted, taken to Los Angeles from Louisiana. They finally arrested the perpetrator, the martial arts teacher, who was only 25 years old at the time. And they brought him back to Baton Rouge in custody. And Jody Plowshay's father, Jody's a man, by the way, Jody Plowshay's father was hiding behind a payphone at the Baton Rouge airport. And when they brought the suspect through the airport, pulled out a handgun and killed him live as news cameras were rolling. They say it's the most watched murder because it was captured by news cameras, and it's not pleasant to watch, but he was never charged, never went to prison. He did pass away, but we've had Jody on, and Jody's a big spokesperson about for domestic violence issues and an advocate, and has really helped a lot of people along the way. And he wrote a book called Why Gary Why. That was his dad's name, and that's what police said when he did it initially, and they had to tackle him. But that's a famous story, and it's the ultimate punishment. But I'll tell you, I don't know. I have 3 young kids, and if something happened to them, I do not know how I would act. There's a really famous UFC fighter in the States named Cain Velasquez, who's a beast of a human being. And he got word that his child was being molested and chased down the perpetrator and actually fired a weapon into the car. He was chasing him. The irony is he could have killed this guy with his bare hands because he's a martial artist, and a very big and mean looking one, but a sweetheart of a guy. And he was in prison for many months. He just got out, and they're awaiting trial to see what happens next. But again, Dana White, who's the president of the UFC, a very public figure, was asked about that, about what does he think of his fighter doing this, and Dana White said it's what every parent says that they would do, but wouldn't do it. And Cain Velasquez went out and went after the perpetrator. But that's a whole other topic. But to me, it's sort of if someone's messing with young kids, it's fair play, as they say in the UK. But I didn't mean to interrupt there. So you conduct you conduct these interviews, and obviously the interviews with the children are difficult. And then does the case sort of gain even more momentum, or where do we go from there?
No, so once the evidence is gathered, and obviously there's scenes of crime, go to the scene and see if there's anything recovered. And obviously we got letters and various bits and bobs. So once that's happened, we as police officers then put our case, our file, to the Crown Prosecution Service, who are the people in the UK who, it's the Crown, it's for the Queen or King, sorry. Ooh, sorry, King Charles, the King now. And so then we wait for court. So at this point, there's a lot of behind the scenes work with really important people with the kids, because, going to court, and I've been to court numerous times. I've given evidence numerous times. I've been a support with victims at court numerous times. But it's horrible. It's really not a pleasant experience. So a victim, between now and going to court, the victims are being kind of counseled as in what to expect, not counseled as in what to say. But, this is how it works. Now, for children, there's different allowance in court. So children are in a room that's video linked into the court. Or if they're older victims, they'll be behind a screen if they need to, but children are generally behind it. So they don't see the court, they just see the judge. And the judges are also very highly trained in the UK to interview and deal with children. Unfortunately, not all the barristers or lawyers, as they're called here, are as sympathetic, because obviously they have a job to do. They have to work for their client. But most of the time they are very, very well behaved with the children. But prior to that, so your victim support are working with the family. We as police officers are still talking to the family, updating them of anything that we're aware of that's changing. The Crown Prosecution can be asking us questions and asking us to provide different parts of evidence or strengthen different bits. So the case doesn't just stop, but it kind of goes down a different road for a few months. And then when you get to court, it's the theatre of court, and that's what it is. And you go into court, people give their evidence, and your barristers cross-examine or don't, depending on what their decision is. And this case went on for several weeks. So as a police officer who runs this case, we're at court with them the whole time.
And was this highly publicized at the time?
This was highly publicized at the time because of the number of children that there were. But again, we're not like America where we got cameras in courts and things like that. But we went to court, and on this occasion, so Crown Prosecution Service are known for having worse barristers, and defense are known for being better because, they're they're paid separately. And, if you can't get a job, they used to say, go join the Crown Prosecution Service. But your lawyers and your barristers are very different. And we had, and I can't think what his name is, but we had the best barrister probably that I've ever worked for, working with the Crown Prosecution. He was amazing. He spoke with all the children before, he spoke with all the families. He just got a really nice air about him, which is what you want, because, it is very stressful in that situation. The parents are anxious and not necessarily being well behaved because of their stress that they're going through. They want a result. They want to see this person found guilty. They want to put some ending to this case. And then this barrister that we had was amazing. And a lot of times you don't call the defendant. Their legal teams will not call them to the stand for various reasons. Mainly you're going to say something stupid or that I can't get you out of in the end. But we went through the whole case, and it runs that the girls, so the two barristers will give their opening comments, and then and these were girls in this situation, not always girls, obviously. They then gave their evidence. Now, the court can decide that the interview that we did, and again, things may have changed from when I did this, but the interview that we conducted with the child could be enough that they just played that interview so the child isn't put through a questioning process, so the judge can make that decision. But the child has to be ready in case because the defense have a right to question the children. If that's the case, the video is played and the girls don't have to talk or the children don't have to talk. But if the defense decides to question them, you may have a really young child. There's no point them being questioned because they won't have a clue. So the video is very important. And then obviously the defense make a decision if they're going to place their client on the stand. And this guy, for whatever reason, whether it was ego or I don't know what his reason would have been at all, but he decides with his defense team that he is going on the stand. So we were like, and we've all given evidence. So he's like the last person. And it's been a tough couple of weeks. And I remember that our barrister stood up, questioned him. Hello, Mr. Thompson, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. Let me play this bit of video. And he played, and it was a shot from the knee to the groin. And one of the girls had a pair of cut off shorts, similar to what I'm wearing today. That was all the shot was. And it was a Spice Girls song. And he said, does that turn you on? And the defendant said, absolutely. Went into this total frenzy, and our barrister just went, no further questions.
Wow.
It was so impressive. He knew that was going to be his response. And he got found guilty of 12 cases, not 13.
Why did he say yes? He just couldn't resist the temptation?
He couldn't. He saw that, and that gave his thrill. And so, that you have to then understand, this is not a normal person, because normal, you'd go, well, even if that's turning me on, I'm not ever going to admit it. I'm in a court. But his response was so automatic, because that was obviously what turned him on, or one of the things that turned him on.
Wow, that's really fascinating, and that's sort of ingenious by the barrister to come up with that, because it could have backfired, I guess.
Totally.
He might have said, I'm disgusted by this, and then who knows? But wow, interesting move right there. So that kind of sealed the deal.
That sealed the deal, and I think there was one girl whose case was kicked out. And I can't actually remember why her case he wasn't found guilty on. So everyone is obviously celebrating is probably the wrong word at the end of these cases, because, people's lives are affected. But yes, they have justice. But you have one girl who now believes they haven't been listened to or heard or believed. And that's very difficult to then deal with, because it's not about the person or their story, or they weren't believed. And I can't remember, it's going to annoy me why he wasn't found guilty on all of them. But you've got to then deal with that, which is long term for, like, why is everyone else, he's been found guilty against everyone else, but not me. And I remember that I went with her parents because the kids weren't in court at that point, and went and told her. And it was just, they were devastated because suddenly you've now got to deal with that fact. And it's harder than, oh, he didn't get found guilty because no one believed us. But you've got all of those kids that have a guilty charge and one that doesn't. So, and that wasn't something that was, it didn't happen all the time, but it did happen. And it was kind of hard to deal with that. And you're invested. And one of the things I think that sets me apart from a lot of police, not a lot, but some police for sure, is I get invested because I have empathy is probably one of my strongest skills, whatever traits. So you're invested and you want everything to be right for these people. You've seen what these families have gone through, and it's really hard because it's not in your control. The minute we get to court, it's out of the police's control. So, we've done the best we can, and then it has to go through the processes that are set up for justice. And it's hard. It's hard on you as an individual, but it's hard on the family too. But he went to prison. I think he only got 14 years. He didn't get, very long. Because in England, our sentences are not. That's what America does so well.
Yeah. That's crazy that he only got 14 years because it was 12 charges you said at the end?
Yeah.
Wow. So it's like, a touch over a year, not even.
Yeah. And probably would have been out in 7.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are the prisons like in the UK? Are they rough?
No, I mean, they're not rough like they are in America. At all.
What about the attitude towards pedophiles in prison in the UK? Is it like here?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a global thing because I worked in a prison in Australia. I worked in a high security prison, and that was like a holiday camp. We watched movies together, and we had popcorn, and let's go play basketball, and but. Yeah, I mean, pedophiles are viewed globally, and even some of the worst criminals in the world, and the notorious gang members. You mentioned pedophiles, and that gives them the right to be angry and annoyed and not really think that they are a bad person because pedophiles are the worst. But the sad thing, I'll get in trouble for this. The sad thing is that we separate everyone in prison. So I had to go into prison a number of times to interview them because we go and interview them for intel purposes or a case that we're working on. So, and you would go in and they're sharing stories. So you have a pedophile who maybe on the scale of good to bad was on the lower end, but they've been in prison and they've got to share stories and contacts. And so when they come out, it's a different ball game and they all get off on each other's stories. So, for me, I'm like, if you're a pedophile and you've done whatever horrendous crime, and yes, you might get a kicking, but that's so be it. When you do that crime, that's your consequence. So, but unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, we are slightly nicer to human beings than we should be sometimes, and they are protected.
Well, pedophiles are definitely on the lowest rung. Recently, the doctor for the women's gymnastics team, the infamous Dr. Larry Nassar, who was sexually molesting and abusing those girls, was just stabbed multiple times in prison. So karma comes around, it's the lowest rung crime I think that you can commit in the States. So, is that how you then? Because I know you're an ambassador for children's rights. and you're into anti-bullying campaigns. Did this help kind of motivate you to get into that?
Yeah, I think that I naturally, I worked with rape victims closely, and then obviously children, and children's everyone's best asset, and they should be looked after and protected. And when I started with the anti-bullying campaign, it was around, I am shit at technology. I've got about 3 followers on Instagram. And so it's not my area at all. But what I was seeing was the social media was allowing for bullying, and the internet. Suddenly kids were doing things that they didn't really understand the consequences. So I would get asked to do a background check. And there was actually a kid who was now coming out of college and had been accepted at this amazing college on a scholarship. And they asked me to do a background check into him, and stuff that he had put on the internet when he was like 13. He joined a chat room, and it was just boys being horrendous about girls, but there were 13-year-olds. And he was not that person anymore. But because he had done that, he lost his scholarship. And so I wanted to try and get kids to understand the consequences of what they're putting out there. Kids are putting less and less clothes on because that seems more acceptable, but that also creates an opportunity for other people. You're sending, you're sexting, and then it's like I had a case where the girl's parents came to me and said she sent her boyfriend a text message of her naked, and now he's sent it around to all his friends at school. And it was a case of, and I was in the police at the time, and it was a case of, actually, she's committed a crime too. And they were like, what? Well, the minute that she sends a naked picture, she has sent something, that's her committing a crime too. So the fact that obviously you now it's got upset and bitter between the boyfriend, they're both committing offences. And people don't understand how that all operates. So, and the bullying side of things, it became a 24/7 opportunity for people. When before my age, you went to school, you were bullied in the playground, you went home, you went and hung out with your friends. Yeah, you might have got bullied the next day, but you got a respite. Now there's no respite. It's 24/7. And so that was the thing that kind of brought me into that.
And how did your work on these pedophile cases, how did it inform your own parenting once you had children? Were you, as they say in America, a helicopter parent? Were you overprotective? I don't know. Do you have daughters, sons?
I have one of each. And if you ask them the question, they'd say it's been a bloody nightmare with her. So I have a daughter, and my daughter is now 28. My son is 22. But yeah, every Friday night or Saturday night, we would sit down, and I would go, because it was Facebook then, and I would go through their Facebook pages and say, how do you know this person? Well, right, delete. How do you have 5,000 people you don't know? So let's get every weekend we would do that. And my daughter, bizarrely, when she was 18, got a scholarship to New York to college, and we'd take her to the airport, and obviously I'm so proud but devastated because she is my best friend and it's my girl, and she's going the other side of the world, and we're crying, and she turns to her brother and she said, look, whatever you do, don't try and get one past mom because it's never going to happen. I've tried and failed. And that was the moment I was like, oh. But as I say to
yeah. No, I was going to say, I always tell, we have Phil Waters on every Friday. He investigated over 400 homicide cases. And I always say I would hate to be your child because they get interrogated at the dinner table. So, yeah, it's funny. I was the son of a psychiatrist and a therapist, and I heard the crazy stories, but you're making sure that the crazy stories don't happen. That's interesting. I didn't mean to cut you off. So did he ever get one past you?
Oh, he's still trying. He's still trying for sure. At 22, yeah, he's 6'4", flipping muscle man. Yeah, he pushes the buttons, but he's not done it yet.
That's good. And did your daughter become a veterinarian or what?
No, so my daughter went to college. She went to the American Academy of Music and Drama to do music theatre,
Mm.
and was amazing and talented, and then became an talent agent. So she's actually my agent,
Ah,
which is very interesting. So, yes, when you talk to Amy on your emails, that's my daughter.
and you can at least you can trust her. That's excellent. You
And she
know,
now rings me and says, "Hey, Mum, I'm talking to you as your agent," and then shouts at me. And then she'll ring me and say, "Hey, Mum, I'm talking to you as your daughter."
so you're reunited with her in Los Angeles.
Yes, so that's the reason that I came here. With both kids were here. My son came initially to play football. He's at college in Arizona, and so I was like, "Well, I may
Wow.
as well come join him." And here
Does
I
he
am.
play? He plays American football at the U of A.
American football. He's English passport. Played
Uh-huh.
American football for Australia because we have Australian passports too,
Uh-huh.
and then came here to play. So yeah, he's like, "Mom, I'm 6'4", Australian accent. Look at me." I'm like, "Oh no."
That's a big deal to be a football player at the University of Arizona.
Well,
Um,
that's a separate story.
that's big man on campus right there. You do have your hands full. Um, Importantly, what advice do you have before we wrap it up? I mean, what advice do you have to parents in this kind of new world that we're living in? Like you said, where there is 24/7 exposure and access to social media. I always have this conversation with my wife. You know, make sure the teachers at school are acting normal. Make sure there's nothing funny, nothing out of the ordinary going on. We had a situation, I won't mention any names, or even it was an activity where one of the people offered to come and get our kids. Made my wife nervous. So you just have to be vigilant. But what advice do you have?
Well, social media has a lot to answer for, and people's reaction. If you think something's going on with your kid, it's on the internet, the Instagram. Everyone has a phone. Your instant reaction is to take that away, because if you take that away, then you are stopping whatever's going on. But that's not the way to deal with it, because that closes people down. Kids nowadays, they'd rather lose their arm than their phone or their Instagram account. And so if they think that they're under pressure, that if they say anything or anything that they're going to lose that, it becomes a punishment for them. So therefore they close down. So I think the really important thing, as a parent, and you said, you made you feel nervous, go with your gut. If you think something's wrong, your kids, how they behave. If you think something's wrong, then try and open up an opportunity of conversation, because without conversation, it's not going to happen. And it may be, I've got an amazing relationship with my kids. Not everybody has the same relationship. So it may be that there's somebody else. As long as they're talking to somebody, it may be a best friend, it may be a best friend's parent. Don't take it personally, but allow, if there's a conversation happening, for that to happen. And just be, every now and again, just ask, is everything okay? Because that's also something that we don't do. And we put a lot down to, this is teenage behavior, this is normal, they're moody, they're grumpy, for whatever, because they're 13, 14. But ask, because it may not be that. And it may be that the child is just waiting for an opportunity to say something, but it doesn't know how to. And I think as parents, kids are a million times advanced on technology and always are one step ahead. And I think that's an important point that parents also need to consider. But be a parent. We don't need to be our children's best friends all the time, because being a parent is a job. And if you're not a parent, you can't protect as a parent should protect. And so that's my, just lines of communication are vital.
Very eloquently said. I got to tell you, I wanted to be a vet too, but I was terrible at science. It didn't happen. It would have been the one profession I would have loved.
Yeah.
What did your mom say to you, your mom, as you guys say, once you finished the academy and became a police officer?
Well, mom was like, my mom, unfortunately, she passed away when I wasn't very old, but I was in the police at the time, and she was just the coolest person ever. And people would say to her, "Are you worried?" And she was like, "No, there's no point being worried. Nina's going to do what Nina's going to do." And she was really proud. And I have a picture of my graduation day, which I will send you because it's hilarious, in my skirt and my hat and my bow tie. But she was so proud of me. But that was, my mom was that person who said, "Do what you want to do." Would she have liked me to have been a vet? Absolutely. Would I? Yes. But I wasn't a actress, so that was a bonus. But she was super proud. And then I got injured. And then everyone was to my mum saying, "Are you concerned? Are you worried? Are you letting her go back?" And my mum's like, it's part of the job. I'm not going to stop her. And I went back and got injured again, just a black eye. It wasn't anything major. But she was like, "Yeah, this is going to happen forever." Like she was just so cool and laid back. And you can't worry. I mean, if my kids said to me today, "I would like to go in the police," then I'll support whatever direction they want to do it. Would I want to be a cop today in LA? Hell no. But yeah, I mean, because there's no respect anymore. At least when I joined all those millions of years ago, there was respect for the police officer. And, when you took a kid home, you knew that was enough at times. But there is no respect, and it's a whole different show about how I think recruitment and training and everything has gone now. But, if they want to do it, then I'll support them for sure.
Well, maybe your 6'4" son, if he doesn't make the NFL, he can throw down some people as a police officer.
He needs to pick his grades up before we do anything else, Joel.
We'll work on that. But your mom obviously handed you down. You inherited the cool gene. For those who don't know, Nina Hobson, she is a former British detective who worked covert operations, major crime, and close personal protection. She's investigated murder, rape, kidnap, global fraud cases, and as you just heard, pedophile rings and pedophile cases. She was also a bodyguard for celebrities and dignitaries, and she is an ambassador for children's rights and drives anti-bullying campaigns and fights for the protection of those vulnerable to harm, which is very important in our society, especially today. And she is the host of a new true crime podcast called Codename. Siren, thank you so much, Nina. Love you, America. Love you, the UK. Love you, Arizona and LA.